There is a version of the British royal family that exists in Christmas cards, in gold-framed portraits, in carefully staged photographs on the steps of Sandringham Church. Everyone smiling. Everyone present. The image of a family held together not just by blood, but by duty, by history, by the weight of a crown that has never, in 1,000 years, fallen quietly. That version is a lie now. Or maybe it always was. Maybe the smiles were always load-bearing walls holding up something that had already cracked underneath. Because what is happening inside the walls of the British palace right now is not a scandal in the ordinary sense. It is not a tabloid story, not a rumor cycle, not another chapter in the long soap opera of royal misbehavior. What is happening right now is a reckoning. A deliberate, cold-eyed, generational reckoning, and the man driving it is not the king. It is his son. Prince William, the future King of England, has spent years watching his family bend around one uncomfortable truth. He has watched the excuses pile up, the half-measures accumulate, the quiet protections extended to people who, in his view, have forfeited any right to them. He has watched his father Charles offer grace where William believes none was earned. He has watched the institution he will one day lead absorb damage it did not have to absorb. And he has decided, very clearly and very deliberately, that when the crown passes to him, none of that will continue. What follows is the true story of how Prince William drew a line inside the most famous family on earth, who he drew it against, what it cost, and why the people closest to the throne were the ones who never saw it coming. To understand what Prince William is doing right now, you have to understand what he has been watching for the past 15 years. Because none of this happened overnight. None of it was impulsive. William is not that kind of man. He is methodical, he is patient, and he has been forming this position for a very long time, longer, perhaps, than the royal family or the wider public fully understood. The York family, Prince Andrew, his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, and their two daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, have occupied a complicated space inside the British monarchy for decades. On paper, they were core members of the royal family. Andrew was Queen Elizabeth's favorite son, by most accounts. Beatrice and Eugenie were her beloved granddaughters. The family lived in Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion set in the grounds of Windsor Great Park, a home that spoke not just of comfort but of standing, of belonging, of a particular kind of permanent protection that only royal proximity can provide. That protection began to erode in 2019, though the roots of the problem went back much further. Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier and convicted sex offender, had maintained a friendship with Andrew for years. A friendship that was photographed, documented, and, as Andrew would later be forced to acknowledge, continued long after it should have ended. The Newsnight interview of November 2019, conducted by broadcaster Emily Maitlis, was supposed to be Andrew's moment to clear the air. Instead, it became one of the most catastrophically misjudged pieces of television in modern British history. Andrew sat in front of the camera and explained, among other things, that he could not sweat. He said this in defense of a claim that he had been present at a location where alleged wrongdoing occurred. The public did not find this reassuring. The public found it bizarre. Within days, Andrew had stepped back from royal duties. Within months, his standing inside the institution had changed permanently. But, here is the part that matters for this story. While the public was watching Andrew's interview in stunned disbelief, while the headlines were being written and the commentators were dissecting every word, William was watching something else. He was watching how the palace responded. He was watching whether the institution would act decisively or whether it would do what it had always done: absorb the shock, wait for the cycle to pass, and quietly return to the same arrangements that had existed before. He watched. He waited. And he did not like what he saw. Because King Charles, when he finally ascended to the throne in September 2022 following the death of Queen Elizabeth, did not immediately cut Andrew loose. He moved carefully, incrementally. He withdrew Andrew's military titles in January 2022. He later withdrew his royal patronages. He made it increasingly clear that Andrew could not return to public royal duties. But Andrew kept Royal Lodge. Andrew kept the protection of the family name. Andrew kept, in the eyes of the public and, in the calculations of the press, a status that was ambiguous enough to cause ongoing damage to the institution every time his name appeared in the news. and his name appeared in the news constantly. William, according to multiple royal sources quoted across various outlets during this period, was frustrated. Deeply frustrated. He understood something about public trust and institutional credibility that he believed his father was failing to act on with sufficient urgency. Every day that Andrew remained in a royal home, every day that Beatrice and Eugenie rode in royal carriages at Ascot and appeared alongside the king at Christmas services, was a day that the image of the monarchy remained muddied. The public could not separate the institution from the scandal because the institution itself was not making a clean separation. William wanted a clean separation. He wanted it done clearly, done thoroughly, and done before it fell to him to deal with it himself. The pressure he began applying, according to royal sources and biographers who have written extensively about this period, was not theatrical. He was not making speeches. He was not leaking to newspapers. He was having conversations. Private ones. Conversations with his father about what the institution needed to look like going forward. Conversations about the difference between protecting a family member and protecting the monarchy itself. Conversations that made clear he believed these two things were, in the case of the Yorks, no longer compatible. Andrew Loney, a royal biographer and the author of a detailed study of the House of York, put it clearly in an interview with People magazine. He said William wants it all cleaned out before he gets to the throne. He wants it dealt with now. That single statement carries everything. It is not a statement about Andrew's guilt or innocence in relation to any legal proceeding. It is a statement about institutional management. About what a future king believes the monarchy can and cannot sustain. About a man who has watched his family bend rules for one of their own and decided, firmly, that he will not do the same. The summer of 2024 was when things began to move in a way that the public could actually see. Reports began to emerge that William and Catherine had been quietly distancing themselves from Beatrice and Eugenie. Not with any dramatic announcement, not with a public statement, but in the way that matters most inside the palace, in the small signals, in the invitations extended or not extended, in the seating arrangements at formal events, in whose name appeared on which guest list. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams told Marie Claire that William and Catherine did not appear to have close ties with the sisters and would probably not miss them. That is a careful sentence. It carries more information than it appears to. Beatrice and Eugenie had actually spent much of 2024 positioning themselves as useful members of the extended royal family. They had stepped in to help during a period when both King Charles and Princess Catherine were dealing with cancer diagnoses. They had represented the family at various events. They had, by most external measures, behaved well. They had kept their heads down, avoided controversy, and done what the palace required of them. Sources indicated this had not gone unnoticed by William. He was watching them, too. But watching them do well was not the same as deciding their position was secure. Because the thing about William's position, and this is the part that distinguishes him from Charles, and from the palace tradition he grew up in, is that he is not evaluating individuals in isolation. He is evaluating the institution's needs. He is asking not whether Beatrice and Eugenie are personally admirable, but whether their ongoing royal presence serves the monarchy or complicates it. And, in his calculation, given everything surrounding their father, given the Epstein files and the growing public pressure and the polling that showed a majority of British citizens wanted the York daughters removed from the line of succession, the answer was clear. It was also deeply uncomfortable. Because these were not strangers. These were his cousins. Women he had known his entire life. Women who had, at various moments, stood beside him at family events, at funerals, at weddings. Eugenie had a particularly well-documented friendship with Prince Harry, which added another layer of complexity to the whole arrangement. The personal and the institutional were tangled together in ways that had no clean resolution. William untangled them anyway. There was, according to Emily Maitlis, the very same journalist who had conducted the infamous Newsnight interview with Andrew, a private meeting. A meeting between William and his cousins, Beatrice and Eugenie, in which the future king reportedly made his position clear. He was not cruel. He was not theatrical. But he was direct. The message, as it filtered through royal sources to the press in late October 2025, was essentially this: the question of your titles is not settled. It can go either way. The decision about where it goes is connected to decisions your parents make. That is not the language of a cousin. That is the language of a future king. And it landed accordingly. The summit at Royal Lodge that followed, a family gathering to discuss what came next, was, by all accounts, not a happy occasion. Beatrice had driven into the estate to support her parents. Eugenie's absence was noted. Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife and the mother of both women, was reported to have had what one source described as a meltdown. The family that had once seemed, whatever its complications, at least unified by circumstance, was fracturing visibly. And the fracture was not random. It followed the fault line that William had, quietly and deliberately, been pressing on for years. What nobody had fully anticipated was what came next. Because while William was managing the institutional dimensions of the York problem, the Epstein files were about to change the temperature of everything. In January 2026, the United States Justice Department released a further batch of documents related to the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. The files did not just implicate Andrew further. They reached wider. Emails in the release appeared to show that Sarah Ferguson had taken her adult daughters Beatrice and Eugenie to visit Epstein in Miami less than a week after his release from prison in July 2009. The flights, according to documents, had been paid for by Epstein. Ferguson had, in subsequent emails, described him as the brother she had always wished for. She had continued to rely on him for money and advice even after his conviction. She had discussed her projects with him. She had asked him to upgrade flights. The files did not describe wrongdoing by Beatrice or Eugenie. But they placed both women in a proximity to Epstein that, in the ferocious context of early 2026, was impossible to simply set aside. The public conversation about the York family was no longer about whether Andrew's behavior was defensible. It was about how deep the connections went. It was about the address book of a dead sex offender and who, exactly, appeared in it. William had been arguing, privately, for years that the institution could not afford to wait for the full picture to emerge before it acted. He had been arguing that the cost of delay was greater than the cost of decisiveness. The January 2026 files arrived like a piece of evidence submitted in his support. The question now was what Charles would do. And, more pressingly, what William would do if Charles did not do enough. The answer to both of those questions would arrive faster than almost anyone expected. And it would arrive on a birthday. The morning of February 19, 2026 began like most winter mornings in Norfolk, grey and cold and unremarkable. By 8 o'clock it was none of those things. 6 unmarked police vehicles moved through the gates of Wood Farm, a residence on King Charles's Sandringham estate. The man who lived there, who had moved in just weeks earlier after being evicted from Royal Lodge, was 66 years old that day. It was his birthday. The police did not appear to be there to celebrate. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man who had once been Prince Andrew, Duke of York, second son of Queen Elizabeth II, fourth in line to the British throne, was placed under arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He was driven to Aylsham Police Station in Norfolk, where he would spend the next 11 hours answering, or declining to answer, questions from investigators. He was photographed leaving the station that evening, slouched in the back seat of a chauffeur-driven car, a man who had once commanded rooms now trying to make himself small in one. The charge under investigation was specific. It related to emails from the U.S. Justice Department's latest release of Epstein files, which appeared to show Andrew, during his time as UK trade envoy, a role that gave him access to sensitive government information, forwarding Epstein a report from his special advisor about an official visit to Southeast Asia. Sharing confidential government trade information with a convicted sex offender. That was what the police were investigating. Not the Virginia Giuffre allegations, which were a separate matter still under separate assessment. This was a different thing entirely. This was a potential crime committed in an official capacity, using official access, for reasons that investigators were now trying to understand. Thames Valley Police confirmed the arrest in careful, standard language. A man in his 60s from Norfolk. Suspected of misconduct in public office. released under investigation. Britain already knew who the man was. The country reacted with something that did not quite feel like shock, because some part of Britain had been waiting for this moment for a long time, waiting with the particular exhaustion of people who have watched an institution protect one of its own past the point where protection was warranted. There was a grim satisfaction in some quarters. There was grief in others. There was, from the family of Virginia Roberts Giuffre, who had repeatedly claimed she was trafficked to Andrew when she was underage, and who had died by suicide in 2025 before she could see this day, a statement that said their broken hearts had been lifted. Their sister, they said, had done this for survivors everywhere. Inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles issued a statement. It was signed Charles R., the King's own hand, not a palace spokesperson. He said the law must take its course. He said what followed would be the full, fair, and proper process by which allegations are investigated in the appropriate manner. He said he had learned of his brother's arrest with the deepest concern. And then, he said something that, read carefully, said everything about where the royal family now stood. He stated clearly that he was ready to cooperate fully. No protection. No buffer. No quiet arrangement to shield a brother from the consequences of what he had done or was alleged to have done. The law must take its course. Kensington Palace released its own brief statement within hours. William and Catherine fully supported the King's position. No embellishment. No separate statement. No distance from Charles's decision. Full support. That alignment was not accidental. It was the visible result of conversations that had been happening for years, conversations in which William had made clear that the monarchy's willingness to shield Andrew was the single greatest reputational threat the institution faced. He had argued it privately. He had pressed it. And, now, on the day of his uncle's arrest, the palace spoke with one voice. Prime Minister Keir Starmer appeared on BBC News that morning and said, with the particular careful precision of a man who was once a lawyer, that nobody is above the law. He said it applies in this case as it would in any other. He would not stand in the way of a parliamentary debate on the matter. The government was not intervening. The government was, if anything, signaling that it was content to let the legal process run without any political pressure to contain it. Andrew had moved out of Royal Lodge just weeks earlier, finally, forced from the 30-room Windsor mansion that had been his home for decades. The eviction itself had been a months-long drama inside the palace. Charles had ultimately demanded it. William, by most accounts, had been pushing for it long before Charles was ready to act. The Royal Lodge situation had become, in miniature, a symbol of exactly the dynamic William had been fighting against: a disgraced member of the family, stripped of his titles, stepped back from public duties, and, yet still occupying a significant royal property at public expense, the physical presence in an official residence functioning as a kind of proxy legitimacy, a way of remaining inside the circle even after being removed from it. Now the lodge was empty. Now the police were searching it. Unmarked vans entered the grounds of Royal Lodge on the morning of the arrest and continued searching for days afterward. Investigators were also at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. What they were looking for was not made public. The investigation, police said, would take time. Andrew had been released under investigation, not charged, not exonerated. He existed in the suspension of a legal process that had no defined endpoint. What existed in the interim was a family, and an institution, trying to figure out how to move forward from something that had no clean precedent. The arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was, as multiple commentators noted, the first arrest of a member of the royal family since King Charles I was detained nearly 4 centuries ago. That arrest led to a trial, a conviction, and a beheading. The monarchy was abolished for a decade afterward. History was not going to repeat itself in that particular way. But, the gravity of the parallel was not lost on anyone who understood what that moment meant for the continuity of an institution that defines itself largely by its own continuity. Eugenie was in her home. Beatrice was somewhere, processing the image of her father in the back of a police car on his birthday. Sarah Ferguson was reportedly in a state that sources described as devastated. The family summit at Royal Lodge, the one that had ended so unhappily in the weeks before, now felt almost quaint in retrospect, a gathering to discuss logistics, to figure out where to live, to manage a situation that had now been overtaken by something categorically larger. Inside all of this, William's position remained clear. His aide confirmed it. His palace confirmed it. He stood with the king's statement. He stood with the law. He did not issue a separate expression of sympathy for his uncle. He did not make any gesture that could be read as distancing himself from the consequences being visited upon Andrew. Some people found this cold. Some people found it admirable. William, by every indication available, was not particularly concerned with either reaction. What concerned him, what had been concerning him for years, long before any of this reached a crisis point, was something larger than one man's legal jeopardy. It was the question of what the monarchy was going to be. Not what it had been. Not what it had always managed to preserve by closing ranks and absorbing scandal and allowing time to dull the edges of public fury. But what it was going to be going forward, in a world where information moved instantly and public trust was not inherited but earned, in a world where an institution that protected the powerful at the expense of the truth had nowhere to hide. William had watched his grandmother hold the monarchy together through force of personality, through longevity, through a particular kind of personal discipline that the public both admired and found faintly unknowable. He had watched his father try to modernize it, try to slim it down, try to make it leaner and more explicable. He had watched his own marriage and his own children become, in some strange way, the public's most accessible entry point into a family that had always remained deliberately remote. And he had watched the York problem fester for years, absorbing credibility, absorbing goodwill, absorbing the public patience that every institution runs on whether it knows it or not. Now he was watching something else. He was watching the moment his father's incremental approach finally gave way to something decisive, forced by legal process rather than by palace strategy, perhaps, but decisive nonetheless. Andrew was out of Royal Lodge. Andrew was stripped of every title. Andrew had spent his birthday in a police station. The Epstein files were being read and reread, and the emails were circulating, and the public was connecting dots that had been lying on the floor for years. There was something else happening, too, beneath the headlines and the legal proceedings. Something that William was watching very carefully. The question of Beatrice and Eugenie had not been answered. It had been deferred. It had been left in a kind of deliberate suspension by Charles, who wanted to protect his nieces, who kept extending small gestures of inclusion, who had them at Christmas at Sandringham, who appointed Beatrice to a charity role just days after stripping Andrew of his titles. By the palace machinery, which needed to manage the optics of association without appearing to punish daughters for their father's behavior. By public opinion, which had not yet fully decided what it felt about two women who had visited a convicted sex offender's home as young adults, escorted by their mother, with their flights paid by the man himself. William had a view on this, too. He had expressed it. He had pressed it. And, now, with the arrest behind them and the investigation ongoing, the question was whether Charles would arrive at the same conclusion through his own slower, more forgiving process or whether the pressure of events would make that process irrelevant. The Royal Ascot Carriage Parade was coming in June. It was, as one outlet put it, one of the most visible markers of who was inside the circle and who was not. Beatrice and Eugenie had ridden in the carriages before. Reports emerged that they had been told they would not be doing so this year. That they had been quietly excluded from one of the most photographed moments of the royal calendar. Behind the scenes, according to sources quoted in multiple outlets, this was a win for William. His hard line, and not his father's softer instinct, was now the one shaping the York family's royal future. But winning is not the same as finishing. And this story was not finished. There is a particular kind of cruelty that institutions practice, and it has nothing to do with malice. It has to do with the gap between what is decided in private and what is communicated in public. The York family spent months in that gap, close enough to the palace to feel its warmth, far enough removed to feel the cold. Beatrice at a Christmas service at Sandringham, walking alongside the king, photographed and noted. Beatrice told she would not be in a carriage at Ascot. Both things true at the same time. both things sending a message, and the messages pointing in opposite directions. This was not confusion. It was a negotiation conducted through symbolism, which is the only negotiation the British royal family truly knows how to conduct. And the two people driving that negotiation from opposite sides were King Charles and his son. Charles's position, at its core, was rooted in something that was not weakness, even if William read it that way. Charles genuinely believed that children should not carry the full weight of a parent's wrongdoing. He believed it with the conviction of a man who had watched his own children become collateral in stories that were not originally about them. Beatrice and Eugenie had not committed crimes. They had been photographed near a person who had. They had visited a man their mother trusted, in a time before the full picture of who that man was had become clear to the world. Charles saw two women trying to navigate something they did not create. He wanted to give them room to do that. He appointed Beatrice to a charity role, deputy patron of the Outward Bound Trust, just days after stripping Andrew of every title and honor he possessed. The message was explicit. The sins of the father were not the sins of the daughters. The institution was not punishing them for Andrew's choices. They would be given the chance to stand separately from him if they chose to do so. William thought this was a mistake. Not because he believed Beatrice and Eugenie were bad people. By most accounts, he did not think in those terms. He thought in terms of what the public could be expected to understand and what it could not. He thought in terms of the image the monarchy projected every time a York princess appeared at a royal event. Every carriage ride, every Christmas walk, every charity appointment that placed their name alongside the institution, each of these was a statement. And, in early 2026, with Epstein files circulating and his uncle under arrest and the family of Virginia Giuffre speaking publicly about broken hearts and justice, the statement those appearances made was one William was not willing to make. He had reportedly pressed for Beatrice and Eugenie to submit to a financial audit, a forensic review of how they had funded their lifestyles during a period when some of those expenses were apparently covered by or connected to Epstein. This was not a punishment. It was, in theory, a mechanism for clearing them. An independent accounting that would allow the palace to say, with confidence, that the financial relationships between the York sisters and Epstein had been examined, found clean, and closed. It was an offer that, if accepted, might have protected them. They declined. The sisters, through those around them, communicated that as private individuals with their own incomes and careers, their finances were their own business. They had done nothing wrong. They did not believe they should have to prove that they had done nothing wrong. William, by most accounts, interpreted this as a choice. And, when you make a choice, there are consequences. The Ascot exclusion was one of them. There was no public statement. There was no formal announcement. There was simply the absence, a gap in the carriage procession where the York princesses had previously appeared. Anyone who understood the language of royal symbolism understood immediately what the gap meant. Those who did not understand that language were told by every royal commentator with a television segment and a social media presence exactly what it meant. The message was unmistakable. William had wanted this. He had lobbied for it. And Charles, finally, had conceded the point, not on every front, not all at once, but in this specific and visible way. The carriage at Ascot. The parade. The photograph that would circulate across every platform and every newspaper. The York daughters would not be in it. This was the outcome of a private campaign that had lasted years, conducted quietly and consistently by a man who rarely showed his hand in public but never stopped pressing when he believed something mattered. Something about the timing of all of it was significant. In the months between Andrew's arrest in February and the June Ascot event, the public conversation about the York family had not cooled. It had intensified. The investigation into Andrew remained ongoing. The Epstein files continued to generate coverage. Sarah Ferguson's documented relationship with Epstein, the emails, the flight upgrades, the description of him as a brother, continued to be discussed in ways that were impossible to insulate Beatrice and Eugenie from, no matter how carefully they kept their own heads down. William had always argued that time was not the monarchy's ally in this particular situation. He had always argued that waiting for the scandal to fade was a losing strategy, because the files would keep coming, the names would keep surfacing, and each new document would restart the public conversation and force the institution to re-explain its relationship with the family at the center of it. He had always argued that decisiveness, clear, early, unambiguous decisiveness, was the only way to draw a line that the public would actually believe. He was being proven right in real time. And that did not make any of it easier. Because there is a personal dimension to all of this that the institutional framing obscures. William is a man in his early 40s who grew up in the same family as these people. He attended the same events, sat at the same tables, existed in the same orbit for decades. Eugenie was among the guests invited to a party that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had attended at Royal Lodge for Beatrice's 18th birthday, years before any of this became public knowledge. These were not figures from a distant branch of a sprawling dynasty. They were people he knew. The choices he was making had faces attached to them. He made them anyway. Royal biographer Andrew Loney had described William's vision for the monarchy as a move toward a more European model, smaller, leaner, defined by working royals with clear functions, stripped of the extended family arrangements that had accumulated over generations and now required constant management and occasional crisis response. In that vision, the York family simply had no place. Not because of who they were as individuals, but because of what they represented institutionally, the cost, in credibility and, in public trust, of maintaining a connection to something that had gone badly wrong. The broader vision was significant because it explained why William's approach was not reactive. He was not simply responding to the Epstein crisis, not simply trying to manage a specific scandal. He was trying to reshape the institution in advance of inheriting it, to arrive at his kingship with as few legacy problems as possible, to have already made the difficult decisions so that his own reign could begin on a cleaner foundation. That is, in the end, what this story is actually about. Not Andrew's arrest, though that was historic. Not Beatrice and Eugenie's exclusion from Ascot, though that was telling. Not Charles's measured and painful navigation of what to do about his own brother, though that was deeply human and deeply sad. This story is about a man who looked at the institution he will one day lead and decided, before that day came, what it needed to be. A man who understood that the monarchy's survival in the 21st century was not guaranteed by tradition or by deference or by the accumulated weight of history. It was earned, again and again, through the clarity of the choices made when clarity was the hardest thing to maintain. William looked at the York family and saw a problem that was not going to solve itself. He looked at his father and saw a man who loved his brother too much to see it clearly. He looked at the institution and saw what it would look like in 5 years, in 10 years, if nothing changed. And he began, quietly and systematically, to change it. There is no tidy ending here. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor remains under investigation, neither charged nor cleared. Beatrice and Eugenie exist in a strange middle space, stripped of some visibility, not yet stripped of their titles, still navigating a public life that is simultaneously inside the royal circle and outside it. Sarah Ferguson is, by all accounts, struggling. The family that gathered at Royal Lodge to discuss its future is now scattered, geographically and emotionally, in ways that may not be reversible. And William waits. Not passively. He is never passive. He waits in the way that a man with a long plan waits, watching to see which elements resolve themselves and which ones will require one more push. He has been patient before. He will be patient again. He has, at the end of all of this, the most powerful argument available: time is on his side. He will be king. And, when he is, the decisions he has already been making will become the decisions of the institution itself. The palace is changing. It is changing because a man who watched his family protect the wrong things for the wrong reasons decided, before he had the power to simply mandate change, to build toward it anyway. Through conversation. Through pressure. Through the slow, deliberate accumulation of decisions that each look like a small adjustment and, together, look like a transformation. Royal watchers have called it shocking. And, in a family that built its identity on never being surprising, perhaps it is. But, to those who have been paying attention, to those who watched William's face at his uncle's Newsnight interview, who read the careful distance in Kensington Palace's statements over the years, who noted every royal event from which the future king was conspicuously absent, every gathering at which he did not appear alongside the cousin whose father was the subject of the afternoon's headlines, it did not look like shock. It looked like the inevitable arrival of something that had been coming for a very long time. The palace is changing. The question that remains open is how much of what gets changed can ever be rebuilt, and whether anyone, Andrew, Beatrice, Eugenie, Charles, or the institution itself, will come out the other side of this looking like what they once were. The answer, if William has anything to do with it, is no. That is the point.